G'day everyone. Welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, as always, joined by my co-host Iowa Joe. Today, joined by a writer for CheeseheadTV and Zone Coverage, Wendell Ferreira. Wendell, it's so fantastic to have another international Packers fan. I feel like sometimes you kind of see, through the internet, you interact with these people and, they're kind of around, but it's like so refreshing to actually get to talk to you. How are you doing?
Hey guys, Nick, Joe, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me on. It's impressive that we are one guy in the United States, one in Australia, and one in Brazil talking about the Packers. It's crazy thinking about a small city in Wisconsin and three guys from outside the state talking about that team. It's really nice, and exactly in the week that Green Bay was awarded to host the draft, it's a pretty special feeling for every Packers fan around the world.
Well, I'm pretty soon I'm going to have to have dictionaries for every country in the world with this. I've got the slang dictionary for Australia. I'm going to have to get a Portuguese one for Brazil, and but
It's
yeah, it really is. It's really interesting. Like Wendell and I were kind of talking before recording. I've met so many international people that are Packer fans, and it just like you said, Wendell, for such a small community that Green Bay is, to have such a large international base it's just crazy to think about.
And earlier this year, I was studying for IELTS, the English test, and I was kind of studying different accents because during the test they can test British accent or American accent. And this podcast right here is a great study machine, a great study tool for that.
Well, I'm glad I can help with education somehow.
When I was playing football when I was a bit younger, I used to play with these two guys from Tennessee, and just the disconnect between us. We're both speaking the same language, but it's like they couldn't understand what I was saying, and I couldn't understand what they were saying, and it was just like it's so confusing because I think especially like Australians are so like lazy when they talk. The words are just so like open and like wow, wow, wow. And Americans are like, very like tight pronunciation, like from the front of their mouth. It's just so funny how it works like that.
Well, and everybody calls it English, but I call it American because English is British English and whatever, whereas what they consider English and what we consider English are like two completely opposite things. And then we have so many different dialects in the United States. You've got your northern dialect and don't you know, and you got your southern howdy doody folks, and it spreads out like all over the place. It just yeah, but I'd hate to have to learn. I thought learning other languages were rough until people started telling me about trying to learn American English. And it's like, okay, all right, yeah, no, I'm all right.
So, Wendell, something I was really
you.
curious about that I wanted to ask you about, for me, being in Australia, the NFL is not that popular. It's kind of getting more and more popular as the years go on, but still, it's kind of hard to find fans. For someone who had an unusual path to becoming a really big fan, such as myself, I'm just really interested to hear, how did you become a fan of the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, here in Brazil, as you might imagine, soccer is the big sport, and it's basically the only sport to be honest, because people don't care about other sports here in Brazil in general. But when I was, I think, 15 or 16, I had clear in my mind that I wanted to be a journalist, and a sports journalist in particular. So my idea was I have to learn about as many sports as I can to maximize my chances in a competitive market. So I started to watch and trying to learn rules about football, tennis, rugby, any sport that I could, and I kind of started falling in love with football much more than other sports. I love tennis, for example. I kind of like rugby. Basketball is obviously another passion, but was more popular here in Brazil than football. But football specifically became a passion for me. then I started watching football and diving into the roots of football, understanding what it is. I by that time I didn't have a team specifically. I didn't support the Packers yet, but then I started to watch
Mm.
to play video games, play Madden. I love. By the time I started watching football, I loved Peyton Manning and Troy Polamalu. So I almost started supporting the Colts or the Steelers. But then I started playing Madden, and I think Nick, you have a similar story. The colors of the Packers had an impact because of the flag, right? And here in Brazil, it's the same thing. Green and yellow are the Brazilian flag colors. And then I started to play with the Packers on Madden. Then I fell in love with the Packers, and then knowing the history and the roots and the tradition and the fact
Hmm.
that there is no billionaire owner owning the team and all those factors helped for me to establish my passion for the Packers. And then obviously watching games and supporting everything became more clear for me. But my initial interest for football it happened because of my
That is
intention to
such a
be a journalist.
unique story. I love that. I would, yeah, that's like, that's just so funny how that works. And obviously the colors thing is like also very like relatable, obviously. But yeah, that's so interesting that like it comes from like what you're passionate about for your career. Yeah, I would never expected that.
Yeah, that's dedication, man. It's so weird for me to hear these stories because, obviously I grew up in the United States, so it was just regular. You have your football, you have your baseball, you have this, you have that. So you're going to be a fan of something. And for guys like Wendell and Nick here to not really have that growing up, but become such dedicated fans because of video games or a color, because of the colors match or whatever. I
Hmm.
just I that
Yeah.
I love hearing that kind of thing.
When I talk to people here in Brazil about what I do, because I was a journalist in a Brazilian newspaper here for 10 or 11 years, and our main job here was to cover soccer. And then I started covering American sports. I had a blog about American sports inside the newspaper website, covering all the four big leagues. And then I I changed my path, my career path, trying to enter the American market. So I started covering the Packers specifically for zone coverage and Cheesehead TV. But it's a crazy thing because when I talk, for example, with my I talk to my family about what I do, or it's crazy because imagine a person from Wisconsin covering a team here in Brazil, a specific
Yeah,
team here in Brazil, a soccer team. It's kind of crazy, right? So
right.
it's that the similar thing that's crazy because I'm here in Brazil. I don't know how many miles I am from Wisconsin, and have that opportunity. It's really nice, And I think I really thank Tom Schreier and Aaron Nagler, these guys from the websites which I work for, because it's a great opportunity that I am really thankful for.
That's awesome. I really it is. I'm kind of jealous in a way because I initially tried to go to school for journalism, but it didn't work out too well, and that's just a whole long other story that would take too long to get through. But just to get to do stuff like that. I mean, obviously now Nick and I are doing like the podcast, so I'm dipping my toe back into things, and hopefully knock on wood, Nick and I can get this thing going to where we can do a website and do that kind of thing too, and maybe I can get back into it, but. You're basically living the dream of a lot of people. You're covering your favorite team, you know, writing stories about them, and you're doing it. But so that's great to hear. Have you ever been able to travel up there yet?
No, I haven't.
No.
I haven't been to the U.S. yet.
Well, you got to tell Nagler to get your ass on a plane and get you up there.
I was writing this week on Twitter that the 2025 draft will be an amazing opportunity to do so.
Well, hey, you tell Nagler to open up the pocketbook and get you up there for the 2025 draft. Obviously, we need to kind of get into being the Packers were selected to be in the draft. I plan on being there. My very good friend Wes is working on getting a house as we speak, and as soon as they announced it, I texted it to him. I said, "You better get your house right now because I've already got plans set. I'm coming up there. I've got to have a place to stay that's not going to cost me an arm and a leg." And so, but I've always said that if Green Bay ever got the draft, I'd be one of the first ones up there. And hopefully nothing happens between now and 2025.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. I think like Wendell touched on, like for me especially, like finding like the more I found out about the Packers, the more I just like fell in love with them. Just the way that it goes beyond just sport, that it's about supporting this small community, and they kind of like that's their thing is football. That's just so amazing to me. The fact that the 2025 draft is going to be in Green Bay, we know that Green Bay has been petitioning for this for quite a while now, and it's really great to see that they've finally gotten it. I've never been, but I can imagine a place that has, I think, what is it, the second or third largest stadium in the NFL, and obviously there's the whole Titletown district. Like a place like that, obviously they have the room to host the draft, and I don't think like I know Joe had a run in with Albright on Twitter, which was pretty funny, but the whole thing of like, oh, Green Bay is going to be boring. I just feel like the organization is too smart, and the community is too passionate for it to be a bad event. And I think it means so much to the community in terms of like the economy and getting tourism and stuff happening in Green Bay. But I mean, like what a fantastic opportunity for these guys in Green Bay.
Well, not just Green Bay's smart about it, but the league is also smart about it. They're not going to hand the draft to a team or to a city without knowing that they're going to be able to handle it. That'd be like the Olympic Committee handing out the Olympics to my little podunk town and say, oh well, we don't care about what, just get it done for next in 4 years. It doesn't work like that. The reason why the Packers haven't had the draft, or I keep mixing Green Bay and the Packers. The Packers aren't having the draft. Green Bay is having the draft. But the reason why it's taken them so long is because of things like the infrastructure, the places to stay, the things like that. But you got to give the Packers credit. They've bought up all that land. They've started building like the Titletown district. They've built hotels. They've helped build the community up to where they can handle such things. I think it was friend of show Dan Kotnick that tweeted this too, that or maybe it wasn't Dan retweeted it or something, that Oshkosh, which is a town near Green Bay, handled like almost 1 million people for an event one year. If that little town can handle it, Green Bay surely can handle it. And I think Mark Murphy came out and said that they don't expect as many people to come as they did in Kansas City, which Kansas City was like 326,000. Murphy said something about, well, we don't expect any more than 250,000. But Ben Albright, you can kiss my fat ass for all I care. If you hear this, you're more than welcome to come on here and we'll have a debate over it. And I will debate you all damn day long. But just because you're not going to have a cushy like you would in New York or something doesn't mean Green Bay can't handle having the draft.
And I have 2 points about that. The first one is what Joe just said, that
that he Green can Bay, kiss my fat ass. Yeah, I agree with that.
Basically, yeah. But that Green Bay has been trying to host the draft since 2022 at least, the 2022 draft. And they haven't been able to do that just because the logistics of hotels and those things. But right now, the NFL felt they have time to do those adjustments needed to host the draft. So the NFL is comfortable doing that. So why why I would have any problem with that if the NFL doesn't have any? And the second point is that the NFL had the draft in New York for 40, 50 years, I think, from the 60s until 2014. Then they decided to make it in a different city each year, just because they don't care much about logistics, as, for example, they do for the combine. The combine is in Indianapolis every year because for the combine it matters. It matters that everyone knows the hotels, the bars, where they're going, the logistics for the players who are testing, for the agents, and for the executives. For the draft, it doesn't really matter that much. And so that's why they're doing this. They had a draft in Chicago, in Kansas City, in Las Vegas. Now they're going to Green Bay. And that's because each city has something different to offer. And that's important for the draft because the draft is a different kind of event. It's an event for the public, for people to that are true fans because it's not a game. It's an event that people are going there to hear players' names called. You have to be a hardcore fan to want that. So I think if you want that, Green Bay is kind of a perfect city to do that because of its history, because of what the Packers have to offer, because of Lambeau Field. So I think, Green Bay will never host a Super Bowl. But the draft is the kind of event that is perfect for a city like Green Bay.
Well, and I was just looking it up as Wendell was talking. Canton, Ohio has less population than Green Bay does. Well, if they can host all the stuff that Canton, Ohio hosts between the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the NFL Hall of Fame, all that stuff, then surely Green Bay, who has a bigger population, can host the draft. And another thing that a lot of these guys fail to remember is it's not just Green Bay. There's all those small little communities that are around Green Bay that will also help with the, I know this is another word that's been overused now that it's been announced, but the infrastructure, it's going to help out with that because it's all within driving distance of Lambeau Field and where they're potentially going to end up having the draft. But, I want to call him out again. I wish we were a bigger podcast so it would get back to him. But Ben Albright, you were shitting on the Packers getting, the Green Bay area getting the draft. I mean, you said it, you called it a mistake. Milwaukee should have been better. You said that you didn't want to drive around Green Bay. Well, that right there tells me you're entitled. You didn't want to deal with a lot of that stuff. You wanted it done for you. So I know I keep coming back to this, but he really pissed me off. And if it wasn't just, messaging on Twitter, I probably would have came back at him a little bit more. But I just I I understand the concerns. I do. There are concerns with everything. One, you got to worry about the weather. Even though it'll be the end of April, beginning of May, it still can snow up there. But I got to thinking about this. What better way to have the draft picks be announced than somebody slide down the tube hill and deliver the card to the commissioner at the stage? I mean, that would be great, wouldn't it? That would be awesome visuals. But whatever. It's going to happen, whether these guys want it to or not. Next year it's Detroit, I believe. So, and I don't want to shit on Detroit, but they've had their issues with their own infrastructure in Detroit with the water and stuff like that. If you can go have the draft in Detroit and have no issues, there should be no reason you can't go to Green Bay and have no issues. Go get you a Butterburger at Kroll's and some cheese curds and a bottle of Spotted Cow and just shut up. Can you tell he riled me up? I I don't even know. And honestly, I don't even know who the hell he is. I know I think it was Brian Maffey said he's more famous than you are, and I said, well, that's not hard. But I have no idea who the hell he is.
No, he's a good reporter, I think, but he's from Denver, I think. But I don't understand. I understand his perspective as a reporter that when you're covering an event, infrastructure kind of matter, because it's good to have several hotels where people will be kind of together or close. But the draft is a different event. It's not like the Super Bowl or the Combine where it matters that much. You talk, and especially in this era, you'll be talking to people all the time via your phone. Anyways, you won't interact as much personally. So I don't understand. I kind of understand his motivation, but I think for the draft it doesn't matter that much.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that, where the infrastructure doesn't matter that much, because the whole point of them moving it from city to city is for people to get that experience of the city. And it's supposed to be where you can go find the dive bar with the best burger in town, or go find this restaurant that nobody's heard of and whatever. But I could rant about this all day long, just because he really, oh, if I was in better shape and probably 10 years younger, I'd challenge him to like a boxing match or something for views.
Jake Paul style.
Cool. Well, the last thing I want to touch on here before we get to the NFC North preview, OTAs. How are we feeling about what's come out of OTAs? I know Domovsky's doing the stat line on Jordan Love, a couple of interceptions. I think he had like a 43 or 45% completion percentage. Obviously this is a direct correlation to how he's going to play during the season. So it's very important that we pay attention to how well he's doing right now.
It's really hard to find what is important and what is not at this time of the year, because some things matter. And I think one thing that matters is what they put on the offensive line. Zach Tom playing right tackle and Josh Nijman playing left tackle was kind of something that we can pay attention moving forward, because I think it might mean that Zach Tom is the starting right tackle and Josh Nijman is the swing tackle, because it makes sense for the coaching staff to put the guy they want starting getting reps at that position. So Zach Tom is a second-year player, he's still a younger player, so it makes sense to give him reps where he's going to play. If he's going to start at right tackle, put him there since day one and let him have some reps. Josh Nijman is kind of more experienced player, and he's played both sides of the line, more on the left side. And if he's going to be a swing tackle and David Bakhtiari isn't practicing, it makes sense to put him on the left side. So I think it's something to pay attention. Regarding Jordan Love, we kind of said the same thing about Rodgers in previous seasons, not only because he wasn't practicing, but the time he was practicing in May, that it's the time of the year where you're kind of figuring out what you can do, the system, and your teammates. So it's time of the year to throw interceptions and to make mistakes and learn from them. I think that's the most important thing. And it's kind of nice to see throughout Love's career how he's developed and learned from his mistakes. That was something that was concerning me a little bit in 2021, because we watched him in the preseason, that those games against the Texans and the Bills, and then we watched him in Week 18 against the Lions, and we kind of didn't see much improvement from him. And that improvement we saw in 2022. That's important. We have to analyze Love from point A to point B, and now to point C, and see where he's going, his improvement. I don't think OTAs are a big factor in those considerations, but when we go into training camp, those things are becoming more clear, and then we'll see better. But I think that line of performance And how he's improving is what we have to see during the offseason and preseason.
Right. And, I know Nick was dripping with sarcasm when he was talking about it, but, the good thing about it is he's building chemistry with, the young group of receivers and, the young guys on the team. Obviously, I don't think Aaron Jones was practicing. I don't think Bakhtiari was practicing. There was a number of guys who weren't practicing. So you're not going to get a full feel of it until training camp, like Wendell just said. But, I the only thing I'm excited about OTAs is I'll be up there in 2 weeks. So, that's the only thing that's got me excited for OTAs. But, there's been a lot of talk about how some of these guys have been looking. I know, these are like the combine of workouts because it's all the underwear Olympics and stuff like that. But, I've heard good things about my boy Van Ness. He's been looking like a freak out there on the field. We did finally figure out
Yeah.
what the Eric Stokes injury is. It was a torn meniscus and a Liz Frank injury in the foot. So, that's good to finally know what it is and know that he's working his way back out of it. Oh, who else has been looking good? They've been talking up Samori Toure pretty well, that he packed on like 10, 15 pounds or something like that, but he's still keeping his athletic ability with it. Who else was
That's
really...
what I was going to say.
Christian Watson has played.
My guy.
Yeah,
well.
yeah. And Dobbs, they said Dobbs was looking pretty good.
Jaden Reed has had ups and downs. I think that's the thing that's important. Some people said, oh, they have to add a veteran receiver, and I kind of disagree with that because this is a younger team. They kind of have the opportunity to grow together, and I know there was a lot of talk about rebuild or retooling or whatever, but the reality is that this offense is kind of restarting, if I can say it that way. So we have the opportunity to for those guys to grow together. Jordan Love is a first-year starter. Christian Watson, Romeo Dubs, those guys. All those guys haven't played more than half a season, basically. So I think it's important to give them reps, to give them opportunities. The Packers won't find a guy on the street right now that has more potential than those guys they already have. So give them these guys reps. And if they're bad, you know. This year, the 2023 season for the Packers is a season to get information about what they have. And then in 2024 and on, they can make smart decisions with the information they acquired in 2023. This is an information gathering season for me.
Right. The only thing that I wish, and not necessarily sign a guy to be a veteran presence, but maybe during like the off season or during training camp, bring in, a retired receiver to come in and work with the younger guys. I have nothing against Jason Vrabel or anything like that, but the coaches can only teach so much. It'd be nice to have that guy who's actually been out there, who's played in the NFL, who's had those reps in the NFL, come in and talk with the younger guys, be that sound off board with the younger guys, because there's really not that on the team right now. I kind of had hoped that the Packers would re-sign Mercedes Lewis. Just, obviously Mercedes at this point in his career is just your extra offensive tackle and your veteran presence. But at least he could have been a sounding board for a lot of these younger guys when it came to, hey, what should I do in this situation? What do I need to do? I understand that's what the coaches are for, but it's always nice having that guy with that experience that they can also bounce ideas off of too. But I agree with you, Wendell, that there's nobody that you're going to find on the street that's going to have the potential that, the guys in the on the roster have. Plus, you'd have to take away snaps from one of those guys to give to that veteran presence. So, I completely agree with that. I just there's not a lot of veteran presence on this team anymore. And yeah, you want to let these guys grow together and all that, but it's always nice to have those veteran leaders that you can lean on. Obviously Bakhtiari is going to be that type of guy. Devondre Campbell's going to have to step in and be that guy. I'm trying to think who all the other
Aaron Jones.
guys.
It's kind of
Aaron Jones. Yeah. So it's going to be, that's going to be another thing to keep an eye on. Is there's going to be a lot of young mistakes, and
well, yeah, I think the thing that I am most
interested
to see, and something that I'm kind of happy with what I've seen from Love, is we talked all season last year about kind of the lack of leadership on this team, the lack of like identity, and someone who can just kind of right the ship when things are going wrong. Like obviously Aaron was a good leader in his own way, but not really the greatest at kind of bring people back from a slump. I think, the way Love has carried himself so far makes me really happy. He's really opening up. We'll see how that extends into the season. But, even guys like Watson, he wasn't really a big rah-rah leader at NDSU, but, he kind of like led by example, and he's the kind of guy that I would love to see take a step forward in terms of like being a leader and setting an example, because he just has a really good head on his shoulders. By all accounts, people that know him, he's a very like smart, not young, smart, nice young man, like a good guy to be around, a really good personality in the locker room. Like all those guys have the opportunity to really define who they are as adults. I mean, these guys are only a year or two older than I am, so it's like they're still finding out who they are. And it's a good opportunity for them to just take control of this team, because as you guys have both said, it's a super young team, and I think the Packers should embrace that. And like the mistakes going to happen, that's cool. Like just ride it and just see what happens. That's kind of the thing I am most keen about, and happy seeing this in OTAs.
One of these days I'm going to slap you for they're only 1 or 2 years older, because now there's nobody on the team that's older than me. I'm older than everybody on the Packers.
I'm older than Carrington Valentine, and that's it.
I think I am as old as David Bakhtiari. I am 32.
Okay, so I've even got you beat. I'll be 37 in a couple months. So there for a while it was just Rodgers and Mason that were older.
Yeah, you're kind of wanting the Packers to resign Mason Crosby so you can say he's older than you at this point.
Or Mercedes. That's another reason why I want him to sign Mercedes, because he was just a touch older than me too. I've got gray hairs in my beard that are older than a lot of the kids on this friggin' team. But no, it's a great young group. And I'm even happy with what I'm hearing out of LaFleur. I guess, what was it? One of the most recent practices, they didn't script it. He just said, go out and do what you can remember. And, that's telling me that he's even been rejuvenated, and he's going to be able to run the offense the way he wanted to. Everybody loved, well, not everybody, but, I loved Rodgers. Everybody else seemed to love Rodgers. But that was the one thing we never did get to see out of LaFleur under Rodgers, was we didn't get to see his full offense to what it should have been. So now I'm hoping we can see it. Obviously he's not going to give Jordan Love the leeway he gave Aaron Rodgers, but he's still going to trust in Love to make the decisions that need to be made.
And
but under his
listening
system.
To what Andy was saying on Pack a Day a couple of days ago, like LaFleur is just, it seems like he's just, like you mentioned, Joe, when he was first hired, that kind of fire has come back a little bit. Like this, like being very like on players when they make mistakes, not in a nasty way, but like he's aware that he's going to have to be a little bit harder on these guys and had to pay more close attention because they just don't have the experience yet. And if you're interesting things that I had not heard about before, like Andy pointed out that if you're on the offense and you lose the ball, like don't die for it, because if multiple people got to die for the ball, you're going to get injured, and there's just no point in an OTA practice getting injured. Things like that, it's like, just have to concede that you lost that rep or you messed up and just move on. Things like that, I think I really appreciate, and I love the way that the Packers have handled their player safety. I mean, they're like a large portion of injuries is luck, but I think they do a fantastic job at controlling what they can control. And, we kind of saw that in the early seasons. There was practically no injuries. Obviously 2021 was a bit hazardous, and like even last year really wasn't that bad. Like there wasn't really many major injuries. I think every team kind of goes through that thing of like, oh, my team is always so injured. But looking at the actual like statistics, the Packers are relatively low on the injury board.
For the last few years, yeah. But before that, it seemed like they were one of the highest injured teams in the league.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the LaFleur era. It's the difference between McCarthy and LaFleur. LaFleur has a great opportunity in front of him to prove what he is. I think today 2013
17
ranking
such a joke
of coaches, and he was 17th, I think. And it's kind of behind Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell, guys that haven't done anything. So I think it's a great opportunity to LaFleur to show that he is special, and I think he's a great leader, a great teacher. And without Rodgers, he had a chance to show people what he is personally and what the kind of impact that he personally can have on this team.
Yeah, and I think that's why people are down on him, because they're like, oh, well, Rodgers is the one that built LaFleur. And so I really think this, I agree with you, Wendell, that this is his year to show that I'm going to say this is his make or break year. If they go out and if Love plays at least decently, but the offense seems to be moving just fine, then, we're going to know LaFleur is the real deal. But if they come out and they're flat and they're not doing anything, then you got to wonder, is LaFleur actually the coach we need? I'm not going to say he's going to be fired at the end of the year, but it's going to let us know what type of coach he is, because he's actually going to be able to do what he wants. And he's spent the last 3-4 years grooming, Jordan Love to be the type of quarterback he wants him to be. So, it's going to be, like I keep saying on all these podcasts, since the Rodgers trade, I'm really excited for this season because of the unknown. We don't know what it's going to be. Usually with Rodgers, we could say, oh, yeah, we're going to win a lot of games and NFC North champions, blah, 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 and all that. But now we don't know. We could come out and the Packers could go, 3-13 and have a top 5 draft pick, or they could come out and win another NFC North title and go to the championship game. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So, yeah, it's got me excited.
If you guys are ready, I'm ready to get into the NFC North preview. So, the division, besides obviously the big change up, Rodgers leaving, it's kind of just a continuation of last year, right? I mean, not really many big coaching change-ups. The Vikings have ditched Ed Donatel for Brian Flores. I'm still pretty heartbroken about that. I can't believe we're still stuck with Joe Barry. But, I don't think we should be expecting to see anything drastically different from what we saw last season from these teams, which does kind of suck because I really liked what the Lions did last year. I'm shocked that Ben Johnson stuck around as OC. I think he's going to be a head coach next year. It's kind of funny because the only team we're not really sure about is the Packers, right? I'm not really a big fan of how the Lions handled their offseason, or really even the Vikings necessarily, besides the Brian Flores hiring. The Bears, their draft was actually pretty decent, but they still need to figure out what's happening with Justin Fields. This is kind of his year, whether they decide he's going to stick around. Yeah, I mean, how do you guys feel about the state of this division? Are there any guys that you wish that we had drafted that other teams had drafted this year? And where do you think these teams end up in the rankings of the divisional rankings?
I kind of think that the Vikings and the Bears were in similar positions last offseason, and because they changed GM and head coach, and they went in different paths. The Bears went full rebuild, and I think it was kind of smart for them. I think Ryan Poles is a smart GM. It's crazy to think that a team that had the first overall pick made the right decision instead of a team that went I think 13-4. I think the Vikings went to the playoffs. But the Vikings were in a position where their team wasn't really that good and kind of got a little lucky, like the 2019 Packers. And right now that competitive rebuild that the Vikings are trying to make, it's kind of blowing up in their face, right? So their team is not that good. Their defense is really bad, actually. Their offense is good, but not great. I think they are not. The offense is not good enough to win the championship without a decent defense. So I don't understand exactly what the Vikings are trying to do. So I'm kind of comfortable with that, with their moments, because I don't think they will be good now, and I don't think they will be really good in the future too. The Lions I think are a team that under Brad Holmes have they have been making smart decisions. This draft obviously was an outlier in that regard because they made questionable decisions drafting a running back and an off-ball linebacker so early.
Hey, we don't talk bad about a Hawkeye, so you just.
I'm definitely on your side.
No, I'm a big don't. I just hate running backs and I hate linebackers.
I just hate Jack Campbell, actually, as a person.
Yeah.
That one I cannot understand because
No, but
sorry.
Seriously, but the Lions, I think they were doing good things, and I think they are still in position to win the division. They are the best team in the division right now. If Love isn't great, they'll probably win the division. But those kind of decisions that it feels like the Lions felt they are ready to win now, and it's those kinds of decisions when you see a team and the team it's not that really good, that good, and they're kind of making short-term decisions. It really doesn't fit well into the future. So I don't think the Lions will be that big of a problem. I think Ben Johnson is still the offensive coordinator right now, but I don't think he'll be there long. So it's a complicated division because everything's kind of still learning what they are. I think the Vikings are in this competitive rebuild. The Bears are rebuilding and they don't know what Fields is. The Lions think they are good, but they aren't that good. And the Packers have a lot of question marks. So I think it's a crazy division. If you think the Packers could realistically win the division, it's not absurd to think that. And they can also be the fourth place. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
And I know we spent a lot of time crapping on what the Lions did, but when you actually sit down and look at a lot of the moves that they've made, even some of the draft picks that they made, they really are a better team overall.
I think they are not as good as they could have been, but they are better than they were last year.
I think it's an upgrade from Gibb, from Swift to Gibb. Obviously, that was kind of weird that they drafted a running back that high, but I mean, when Nick and I did the running back preview episode with Sarah, we all liked Gibb. We all thought he was, a star in the making. They just thought he was a little bit better than what we were, ranked him a little higher than what we were ranking him. But then you see that they traded Swift, so they knew that DeAndre wasn't in their plans, and they had a hole. They didn't have Jamal anymore, which I find that kind of questionable since they did trade DeAndre, that they didn't hold on to Jamal and draft Jahmyr Gibbs. But they had a hole. They filled it. I was just looking through the Lions draft and some of the comments that were made on about the Campbell pick. They had a hole in the middle of their defense. They filled it with an athletic, off-ball linebacker. I'm not going to trash him because he's a Iowa Hawkeye, so I can't say a bad word about him. Then they went out and they drafted Sam Laporta, which even if he wasn't a Hawkeye, I was still would have been high on because of his athletic traits and, the type of player he is. Brian Branch, a lot of people thought Brian Branch was going to be a first rounder this year. I wasn't one of them.
I
I
thought
don't remember
like a
if
late
Nick was
first
as
round
high
in
on him
20s.
as some other people were. Yeah. So for him to be taken in the second round, obviously I don't think he's got the athletic traits to be, an amazing player, but, we've been surprised before, but, they had a hole at safety, they filled it. Hendon Hooker, this was always going to be a red shirt year for him, but for him to sit behind Goff for a bit, maybe he replaces Goff in a year or two. I don't know how long Goff has got left on the Lions
I
roster.
think 2 years left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Defensive tackle, offensive tackle, wide receiver. They basically were plugging away at the stuff that they needed, and I think they upgraded over a lot of things that they already had on roster. So I think it was last week with Maggie that we talked that I the Lions could be a surprise team in this. I'm not high on the Vikings, and I was just looking at their stuff, and they
I
had a
really don't get
really
what Quessy is
weird
doing there.
draft.
Legitimately, he's
Not
just so confusing, and the way that he even
Yeah,
the
I don't know.
trades that he's done. I mean, yeah, I sorry to interrupt, but I love the Brian Flores pick, but literally everything else they've done is just like I have no idea where you're going with that.
And even Brian Flores specifically, I like him as a play caller, as a coach, but I don't know if he's running his defense, because it feels like they'll keep running kind of a 3-4 defense, and he's more like of a Bill Belichick 4-3 defense. And I don't know how well they will adapt those things and mesh those things together. I know I think they worried more about getting a right play caller and a right coach than specifically worrying about the scheme. But the scheme matters too, and I think they might have some conflicts there this first year.
right. They went more for name value than they did play value. But just looking at their draft, though, it's really weird because if you look at it, they didn't go very far outside of certain areas. Their first two picks were from USC. Their next two picks were both from LSU. I, I, I mean, talk about falling in love with a conference that pretty much they were Pac-12 most all the way. I mean, BYU and then UAB. I I I mean, I suppose if they really love those guys, I wasn't high on Jordan Addison. I think that episode we were talking with Dusty Evely about wide receivers, and I think we all kind of said that we weren't really enamored with him. I didn't think he had the speed. I thought he was going to be like a Laquan Treadwell type player where he had success in college, but it wasn't going to translate into the pros. So, I mean, I suppose the corner that they took out of USC I liked a little bit, but I thought that was a little high for him. And then I did like Roy out of or Wah or however they, he came from
Sam
LSU,
was high
so
on him when we did our D-line episode.
Weird
Sam
way,
liked him.
Yeah, and I was too. I really liked him too, but I don't think he fits what they run right now. So that's a little weird. But and then the Bears are going to bear. They've got a glorified running back at their quarterback position. They did. I know on your show notes, Nick, you have. Are there any players that were drafted by a rival that you absolutely hated seeing go to the rival? And that's Gervon Dexter. I really liked Dexter, and for him
They
to
got some
be at the
bangers in there.
Bears, it kind of sucks. They had a nice draft, but it's the Bears. I mean, they seem to screw everything up anyway. There are some guys that I kind of question a little bit. I mean, they did all right taking them later than what than what some people had, like Noah Sewell. He's a nice player. I liked him, but you know, he was an off-ball linebacker in college, but I thought he was a little too big to be an off-ball linebacker. I thought he was going to be more of an edge guy, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him. But they took him in the 5th round, and that's where you take projects like that. Tyler Scott,
Yeah,
I think Nick, you were
I
kind
didn't
of
think
high
the
on
Packers
him,
were
weren't
going to
you?
draft him, but I did like him.
Yeah.
I liked him.
Rashawn Johnson, I really did like him. I thought he was a little bit better AJ Dillon. So that one kind of sucks too, but it doesn't hurt me too much because they've got to retool their running back room anyway. So, I mean, they had some nice picks, but, are they going to use them like they should, or are they going to do the typical Bear thing where they ruin these guys before they can even have a career? I'm surprised they didn't try to do something at quarterback. I know they love Justin Fields and he's their guy, but they're going to run him into the ground
That's
because
harsh.
all he is a glorified running back.
He's a good, he has. If you
Well,
watched him in college, he was a throwing quarterback first and foremost. The running thing is a NFL development. Obviously, he's a special athlete, but he doesn't. He's not the guy who relies on that necessarily.
you're yeah, but you're kind. I'm either missaying it or you're not understanding what I mean. The
Sure,
Bears are
but
using
that's
him
not
as a
Fields'
glorified
fault though
running back.
necessarily.
So yeah,
I
but
think
it goes back to what I said, where the Bears aren't using the players to their potential. They're ruining guys before they can actually have a
I think the
career.
problem is that Fields in college, Fields was kind of a passer because he could, and in the NFL he can't. He's
Sure.
not an NFL passer, a
There
good
you
NFL
go.
passer. So look at he's a smart coach, and he's kind of using what he can from him. What Fields is able to do in the NFL
Sure.
is to run. So he's kind of doing what he can. That's why earlier in the offseason I said the Bears should consider a quarterback at number one because and then trading Fields or keeping Fields, but probably trading Fields because it's kind of what the Cardinals did with Murray and Rosen. If they pass on a guy this year and that guy becomes a star, and Fields is what he is, that at least for now he's a bad player. That has a bigger impact on the team and on the roster and on the franchise in general because obviously they had a great trade package. I think obviously a lot of picks and DJ Moore is a really good receiver. But if Fields is
Yeah.
bad, it kind of doesn't matter either. So the quarterback is the most important thing. And if I don't know if I don't I didn't fall in love with Bryce Young. I kind of CJ Stroud was my quarterback one, but not a great prospect, perfect prospect to fall in love with. But it should have been a consideration for the Bears because from what we saw, Justin Fields is worse than Trubisky as a passer. If you compare the first 3 years of their careers as a passer, Trubisky was better. So it's really hard to from that point of their careers to think that Fields can be that much better. Obviously, the circumstances around him are better now with better receivers and potentially a better offensive line. So there might be some improvement there, but I don't think Fields will ever be an elite passer. So it's really
Sure.
hard to build something around him.
And that's a good point. I mean, yeah, he wasn't a strong passer to begin with, but like I said, the Bears have a habit, no matter who's running the team, of drafting these guys and using them completely wrong, and it ruins them. And then when they get away from the team, they can't rebuild themselves because the damage is already done.
There's something interesting that's a comparison between what they've done with Trubisky and Fields. That they didn't fire the old regime before drafting the guy. So the first year with Trubisky was under John Fox, and then they fired him and hired Matt Nagy, and then they fired Matt Nagy 1 year after getting Justin Fields. So it's kind of strange because if you want to start new with a new quarterback, it makes sense to get a player with confidence, and the coaching staff has to have confidence in the player. So it's hard when you change everything after 1 year with the player in the system. The player has to learn everything again. It's a big transition from college to the NFL, and then to have the player has to have another transition from system to a new system. And the Bears are doing it all the time. And again, and I think I liked Trubisky as a prospect, and I liked Fields as a prospect. And I'd say, imagine if Mahomes was the Bears pick in 2017. Mahomes would probably have been better than Trubisky, but he certainly would have been as good as he's been in Kansas City. So it's really hard to justify what the talking about
something that I think is
and I think that's with any of it.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say I agree. It's the same with any of it. If they would have drafted Jordan Love, same thing. He would have never been what they had hoped. If they would have drafted Aaron Rodgers back in the day, I don't think he would have been what he was. He might have been all right, but I don't think he ever would have reached the 4-time MVP, 1-time Super Bowl champ. It just, for some reason, Chicago is the place for these guys to go and die.
Where people go to die, yeah.
No, yeah, I think it's something that I think is still quite funny. I was thinking about putting one of the prompts here as who is going to be the next big dog in the NFC North, but it's you can't trust any of these teams to handle their business well long term. You get spurts. The Vikings, had a couple decent years. The Bears, they've had years here and there throughout the past 20-ish years. The Lions obviously have only kind of just come on. They the last time they went to the playoffs was 2010, 2011. Maybe a little bit later with Calvin Johnson and Stafford, but it's you can't trust that any of them are going to maintain that. Even the Lions, I think that the Lions are a product of Ben Johnson more than they are Dan Campbell. And the Vikings that are so in flux, and the Bears, it's such a big question mark. And that's not to say that the Packers are necessarily any better, but the Packers have a track record going back 30 years now of continued success and intelligence in the organization. They have a system that has been in continuity since the 90s. Gutekunst was in the room when they drafted Rodgers. This is not I'm scrambling.
Oh, no, he wasn't.
But the Packers aren't scrambling for decisions. They have backup plans on backup plans. They're thinking about these things. They put themselves in a position to draft another quarterback potentially if they're bad this year for next year. They're not dumb. They're not just praying that Jared Goff is going to stick around at such a high level to win them a championship. I think that's also a big reason why I love the Packers, right? Is because they're an intelligent organization. And you can't really say that about these other teams because they don't have the prolonged success or rings to show it.
The hardest thing about the NFC North is because when you analyze the team's long-term, the sustained success that you are looking for, generally it relates to having a young and talented quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And in the NFC North, we're not sure about any of those teams. The Vikings have Kirk Cousins that might not be the quarterback there next year. Jared Goff might not be the quarterback the Lions next year. Justin Fields is kind of bad. Jordan Love, we don't know. So it's kind of what you're talking. It's about we trust what organization do we trust more that will make smart decisions. And I think right now it's the Packers. It's the Packers because maybe Jordan Love isn't good. We don't know. Maybe he's mediocre or bad. But they have armed themselves to maybe get another quarterback. I wrote a piece earlier this year before the draft, and before the Aaron Rodgers trade, by the way. And my point was that it was more important for the Packers to add 2024 draft capital than 2023 draft capital. Because, as I was saying earlier, this season is a year for the Packers to gather information. So if they have more draft capital this year, they will make those draft picks before getting that information. In 2024, they will make smarter decisions, well informed decisions. So that's why they have more draft capital next year. And so now they have probably 2 first round picks. Maybe they'll trade someone during the season if things don't go right. And they'll have more draft capital next year. Maybe to surround Love with more offensive talent, or maybe to improve finally his defense and give Joe Barry more weapons. But my point is that the Packers are in a position to get sustained success with Love or without him. And I think the other teams don't have such smart structures in place to do the same.
Something I wanted to ask you guys as well. How do you feel the Packers do against these teams? In division record, I think these these teams, as in with these rivalries, they're always kind of close, right? I mean, with the Lions, as much as we like to joke about the Lions, they have historically played us really well in the past 5 or 6 years. The Vikings, we always seem to drop one stupid game against the Vikings. The Bears are the Bears, but also Aaron Rodgers isn't around anymore. We'll see if he's passed the deed of ownership to Jordan Love soon enough. But how do you guys feel that we fare? I mean, personally, I think realistically, I think we split it, 3-3. I just think we lose one game to each of these teams, or maybe we beat the Bears twice and lose to the Lions twice and win once against the Vikings. I would find it tough to bank on a 4-2 record in the division or anything higher. I mean, where are you guys at?
Yeah, I think 3-3 are a reasonable expectation. I think they might win those 2 games against the Bears and lose the 2 against the Lions and split with the Vikings. The Vikings are a strange team, because their offense is really good. Kirk Cousins is from the information we have now. Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback of the division. I think Cousins is better than Goff and more sustainable. What Goff did last year, he's kind of much more dependent on what the surroundings. And the Lions have Amon St. Brown, obviously, but without Jameson Williams for 6 games, we don't know how well he'll play. The Vikings, as I said, the offense is really good, but their processes of building the roster are strange. It's something that, talking about the draft, so I was expecting a trade down for them because they picked that Jordan Addison at 23, and their next pick was 102. And that's not exactly what we expected from Kwesi. I think he was that analytics guy and trade down guy, and that's not exactly what we are seeing with the higher picks. Last year he did it. This year he didn't. But their defense is really bad. Really, really bad in terms of personnel. So I think even if Love isn't great, the Packers team is more balanced than the Vikings. I think it's hard to have a clear picture of that because generally offenses are more sustainable and the offense is generally more important than the defense. But the Packers have the opportunity to have a decent offense, a good offense, and potentially a really good defense. So if the Packers can do that, I think there's a reasonable expectation that the Packers can be better than the Vikings. My expectation is for the Lions to win the division and maybe win both games against the Packers. And the Bears will probably still be the worst team in the division because their defense is really bad. It's a young team. And as I said, I don't believe in Justin Fields. So I think the Packers will probably fight with the Vikings for the second place.
Wendell, you took my thunder. I was going to come out with a hot take and say I think the Lions could be the dark horse to win the North. So now I can't have that.
Yeah,
they're
the betting favorite.
Are favored to win the division. I think it's not that out of a yeah.
But see, and I kind of disagree with you, Nick. I think my prediction is they go 4-2 in the division. And it's kind of contingent on what they do against the Bears in week 1. Because I think what it is I think they'll sweep the Bears and they'll split against the Vikings and the Lions. But like I said, I think it's contingent on how they come out and play week one. I would think a little bit differently if it wasn't a division game for week one. Let's say it was, the Saints again for week one and they didn't play the Bears until week three. Then I probably would split, or I would be a little bit more comfortable in saying 4-2. But being as it's the first game of the year and this is the first time we're going to see Jordan Love start at Soldier Field and so and blah blah blah. It's kind of a rough way to predict that one, but I'm not. Wendell and I agree on that. I'm not sold on Justin Fields being, an amazing quarterback. And hopefully the Packers have their defense shored up enough where they can stop a mobile quarterback better than what they did last year. And
in the last decade.
Yeah. So I don't think the Packers can, or I mean the Bears can beat the Packers unless, Fields can be mobile. So yeah, I think they'll win 2 against the Bears and split against Minnesota and Detroit.
Yeah,
which always seems to happen.
Yeah, very fair. I mean, yeah, like it's all we can do at this point is speculate and guess. But I am an optimist. I mean, didn't feel like that for much of last season, but I am definitely optimistic, and I'm confident that this team will be decent. Like just out of curiosity, Wendell, what is your record prediction for the Packers this year?
I haven't thought much about that, to be honest, but I think they can be good. I think the 9-8 record maybe, and fighting for a wild card spot. I think it's a fair consideration, because if you analyze what the Packers roster is, the defense is basically the same what it was from last year. They lost Adrian Amos, Jaron Reed, but those are not that much important. Amos was important, but last year he didn't play well, and it's important for Amos and it's important for Aaron Rodgers too. The dip that Packers took in performance, it was from 2021 to 2022 in quarterback play and safety play. So unless Jordan Love is unplayable, there won't be a downgrade in quarterback performance from last year to this year. If Jordan Love is a decent player, top 15, top 20 player, Aaron Rodgers was a top 20 quarterback last year, not better than that. So the downgrade in performance was from 2021 to 2022. If Love can be a decent player, decent quarterback, not great, kind of a fair expectations what we have for him, I think the Packers will be what they were last year. 8-9, 9-10, 8-9, 9-8. If Love can be a little bit better than we expect, I think there is a real chance for the Packers to win the division. And the NFC in general is kind of open, because the Eagles are a good team, but they are probably not as good as they were last year without the coordinators. And San Francisco is a good team too, but we don't know about the quarterback. And, the quarterback hasn't mattered much for them in the last couple of years, but it is important to have a good quarterback. I don't believe Brock Purdy, even if healthy, will be such a good season again. The Lions are probably a good team too. The Cowboys are a competitive team. But the NFC is wide open. If Jordan Love can be good, I think the Packers have a decent chance.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say here is just that I'm of the belief that Matt LaFleur is almost directly responsible for Aaron Rodgers winning those 2 MVPs. And I think he knows. He comes from that Shanahan line. He knows how to make things easy on the quarterback. It just seemed like at times the quarterback wanted it to be a little bit more difficult. So I have confidence that he will find ways to make things easy for Jordan Love. And I fully expect Jordan Love to be at least league average this year. And that's, like as you said, Wendell, that's really all that Rodgers gave us last year. So if we can get to there again, we'll be fine. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Joe, before we finish up here?
Nothing. Yeah. What are you guys thinking about the kicker situation? Because the Packers released that Parker White, and so the only kicker left on the team is
Well, yeah,
Anders
the Jags released
Carlson.
their kicker, which I think is very, very interesting.
No.
Oh,
Oh,
really?
they
I didn't see
traded
that.
him to the Lions. Actually,
Yeah. It was. Yeah.
yeah, it
It
was
was
a
Right.
It was misreported.
actually he was going to be released, but when the Lions saw the news, they kind of traded a conditional 2026 seventh round pick for him, Riley Patterson. I think he's a decent kicker, yeah. But when the Packers decided to draft Anders Carlson in the sixth round, it was kind of a written story, right? That he was going to be the starter. He's a Rich Bisaccia guy. Bisaccia loves him. He worked with Daniel Carlson, that is Anders' brother in Las Vegas. And Bisaccia invited Daniel to his college. He was recruiting him at the time. He was working in in college football at the time. So they have a family relationship there. Bisaccia said that Carlson has the mentality to play the position, and kicker is a strange position because the mental part matters probably as much as the physical aspects of the game. So I don't know. I don't like Anders Carlson obviously as a prospect. It's really hard to measure because his college numbers are truly bad. But Daniel Carlson also, he was a fifth round pick by the Vikings, who was released after 2 games, went to the Raiders and became a top five kicker. So my concern is about the short term. If Anders Carlson begins the season missing consecutive field goals in the first games. But if the Packers are able to go through that early struggles, I think he has a chance to become a decent kicker. But it's a difficult path to go through when the guy is starting a career and maybe struggling. And I don't know if the Packers will be patient enough to wait.
Yeah, and I know they're set on Anders most likely being the starter, but it's kind of surprising that they released the other guys so early. I figured they would at least go through training camp with a couple of kickers on roster just to, build in competition. Don't let the new kid think he's just going to come in and, he's just handed the job. Let him go out and earn it, because that gets the competitive juices flowing, and that helps build up what he needs to do. But as I guess they had better thoughts on the spots that they filled after
Hmm.
releasing White. So I don't know.
I'm not, I'm
Are
not,
there
I'm not,
any?
I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of drafting kickers in general and punters
Oh, you
because
mean you didn't want to take one in the first round like the Raiders did a few
The
years
Bucks.
yeah,
back, or like a dozen years
the
back?
Bucks drafted Roberto Aguayo, right?
Yeah. Well, no, the Raiders took
The Raiders
Sebastian
took
Janikowski
Janikowski.
in the
Yeah, it was in
first.
2000.
Chase
Yeah.
Moody in the third.
I can't
But
believe it's been that long
the
ago.
Packers had four. Yeah, the Packers have had four seventh round picks this year, so I would understand if they got a seventh round kicker. They ended up getting one in the sixth round because it's really hard to scout kickers. The NFL doesn't know how to scout kickers, and it's frequently undrafted guys ended up playing better than the drafted ones. So I am not a big fan of drafting. The Packers, for example, drafted a punter in the fifth round a couple of years ago, and he ended up being not really good. They
Yeah.
drafted a long snapper in the seventh round in that same year, J.K. Scott and Hunter Bradley, and both guys were bad. So I don't think it's a smart strategy. The Lions ended up getting a reliable kicker and a guy that we know already is decent with a future conditional seventh rounder. I think that's a better use of resources than what the Packers did. But I don't know if Carlson is good. The Packers have a relatively cheap kicker for 4 years, so let's hope it pans out. But in terms of process,
Mm.
drafting kicker, I don't think it's a great idea.
So, do you know any footballers down in Brazil that can come up and kick for the Packers if
There's
need be?
two things. First, the Bears
Yeah.
kicker Cairo Santos is a Brazilian player.
There you
He's
go.
he's from São Paulo. And there's a nice story about a Brazilian soccer player. Ademar is his name. He was a mediocre to good player here in Brazil, but his kick was amazing. He had a bizarrely strong leg. And after he stopped playing soccer, some NFL teams invited him to try out, and he started transition to football, but it didn't go very well. But there is a relationship between, like, there was a lot of there's
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
Australian punters,
Yep.
right, and because I think it's because of the Australian rules football, but Brazilian players, that I think there are a lot of 3 or 4
Yeah, cool.
college kickers that are from Brazil. There is a correlation between soccer and
Australians are good at punting because like the kicking motion for a football is like pretty similar to a punting. The main difference is just the shape of the ball in the NFL is not ideal for kicking because of the sharp tip. But yeah, like for the most part, like that's why it's quite easy for people who train, if like Australians, just to transition to punting, because also like you punt much less distance in NFL than you do in AFL. The AFL, you're like the field is like I think the AFL field is like the largest field of any sport. Like it's just like massive the distance they have to kick it, and obviously they don't go all in once, but like punting it like what 60 yards, it's like not really that difficult for most Australian like professionals.
Hey, I'm all for it. Like I said, the University of Iowa's punter is an Australian punter, and he was like the best punter in the nation last year. So I I'm all for it. And if
The Packers signed a punter that is not American, right? I
Yeah.
think he was from
the
Ireland. From
Irish
Ireland, I
guy,
think. Yeah.
yeah, Whalen or whatever. How and I had heard. I don't know if it's truth or not, but I had heard rumors that he can place kick too. Yeah, I don't know. So
Mm.
that could be the competition there. They can keep him on the practice squad just in case, something happens to O'Donnell, or if he can place kick, maybe they're thinking he can be, somebody to step up if Anders can't do it. Yeah, the Irish Hammer. I can't think of what his
Yeah.
first name is.
Yeah.
It's his last.
Daniel Whelan.
Yeah, yeah, and he's a big guy. I think he's like what 6'6", 200 and some pounds.
And Carlson is also a big guy. They kind of
but he's lanky. The Packers have some weird fascination with tall, lanky kickers because J.K. Scott looked like he was a 12-year-old in a 20-year-old body.
And it's crazy because Scott is playing really well for the Chargers.
Chargers are Bills.
He kind of didn't kick well in.
Okay.
I think no,
Yeah.
it's Chargers. J.K. Scott.
Oh wow.
Yeah, J.K. Scott is the Chargers. And I think it was something related to the cold weather, maybe. But
most likely,
he's playing well in Los Angeles.
And I think that can be a lot of it with Daniel Carlson too. He went from kicking in, a bunch of cold weather stadiums to not so many cold weather stadiums, and that'll do it. Bajorquez was the same way. He was a terrific punter until it came to cold weather punting, and then he couldn't do nothing. So
Bajorquez is fascinating because he is a good punter, and I think what ended his tenure in Green Bay was because he was a bad holder, and a lot of Crosby's mistakes was because of him. So
he was a bad holder, but he also had a lot of issues kicking in the cold.
Yeah,
you could tell he struggled kicking in the cold. So,
but I think he's still a better punter than O'Donnell in general.
I don't know. I mean, there's something about O'Donnell that he's more reliable. He may not be like the best punter ever, but at least he's not going to shank it every other kick.
Yeah,
you're pretty sure you're pretty certain that he's going to get it down the field and with enough hang time that your guys can get there. Because I mean, they weren't like a top 5 special teams, but you could tell that the special teams unit last year was completely different than years prior. So, and you can credit a lot of that to Bisaccia, and a lot of the free agent signings this offseason were Bisaccia related for that special teams. But I don't want to keep you too long, but it's kind of interesting the moves that they've been doing in the safety position. They brought in Owens, they brought in Moore. I think they're trying to reach for that diamond in the rough like Goody's done the last few years with like a Keyshawn Nixon and a Rasul Douglas and a Devondre Campbell. So
yeah, most of their safeties always is more of a defensive player truly, but more is more like of a special teamer. And I think they may be trying to do what they did last year with Rudy Ford. It's like they will add safeties that are mostly special teamers, but if they can do something defensively, it's a plus. And those are cheap guys, cheap options.
yeah,
and I think Gutekunst in general has been really good working on the margins of the roster, reinforcing, and that's something that Thompson didn't do really well. That's basically the biggest difference between Thompson and Gutekunst, because Gutekunst he's always trying to find players, claiming players off the waivers, and those little movements that ended up being really important for the team. Rasul Douglas was signed off the Cardinals practice squad, for example, and those in-season movements are important for the shape of the roster long term.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. I really look forward to it. But that's about all I got. You got anything else, Nick or Wendell? You got anything you want to mention?
That's just a great opportunity to talk to you guys. It was amazing, and I think you both are really awesome people and awesome follows on Twitter. And it's really nice to share my experiences and to share our collective perspectives about the Packers and from different places, different cultures. And it's really amazing to talk about a sharing interest of ours, because football is family, man. Football is family, and I think it's a nice opportunity to get people together. Sometimes Twitter is a toxic place sometimes, but it's also a nice place to find people from everywhere that has similar interests, and you guys are awesome people.
No, thanks, man.
For that regard too.
Well, and that's why I like the Packers so well, is because I always, it's a team and there's fans, but in reality, it is a family. They always say that if you go to a game, you can walk the tailgating parking lots and people will just start handing you food and booze and everything else. They won't know you from, whoever, but because you're there and because you're a fan, you're a family. And I've met some of my very best friends as, at training camps and stuff like that. Or I've met, a lot of international people doing these podcasts, and, so it's, hey, that's why the Packers are a great team, is because of the community that they've built. So, and we appreciate your kind words, even though I am kind of an asshole sometimes, and I still would slap the shit out of Ben Albright.
Well, guys, to finish up here, as always, you can find us on Twitter. You can find Wendell at WendellFP, myself at NicholasGRGR, Joe at Iowa_Joe86, and of course the podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, see you later.